It was just after 5:12 a.m. when a woman in a ripped gray sweater, barefoot and shivering, sprinted out of the mist-covered woods clutching a baby swaddled in a pale blue blanket that looked far too clean for the dirt and blood caked along her arms. Her eyes were wide, darting like a deer that had already been shot but didn't yet know it was dying, and her lips kept moving, whispering something, over and over, words no one could hear. A passing sedan slowed as she stumbled onto the asphalt, one hand waving, the other clutching the bundle against her chest with a desperation that looked too raw to fake. The driver, a middle-aged man on his way to an early construction shift, rolled down the window halfway and leaned out, concern blooming on his face. "Ma'am, are you hurt? Is that a baby?" He didn't get to finish. The woman spun, her face twitching with a flicker of recognition or fear, or both, and stepped toward the car. The man leaned out farther. "Hey, wait, what's going on, are you?" Then he saw the baby. His face changed. It went from concern to horror in the space of one blink. "What the hell was all he managed before his car jerked sharply, tires screaming as he accidentally swerved off the road and crashed into a ditch. The woman flinched, stared for a second at the steam hissing from the hood, then turned and ran again, disappearing back into the brush like she'd never been there. The baby didn't cry. Not once. She found shelter just as the sun began to rise. An old one-story farmhouse tucked behind a line of bare trees, its windows blackened with mildew, its roof bowed like a spine burdened by age. Inside, dust clung to every surface and the smell of mold hung heavy in the air, but Elena didn't notice. Her hands trembled as she laid the baby on a rotted mattress and checked its face again. It looked perfect. Round cheeks, tiny mouth, the softest hint of curly brown hair just like Sophia's used to have. She didn't understand how she had buried Sophia 10 years ago. She'd stood at that tiny white coffin, her fingers numb and her mind already halfway gone, listening to people say things like she's in a better place, and God has a plan, while something inside her chest screamed so loudly it drowned out everything else. But here she was now, in a house she didn't recognize, staring at a baby that looked exactly like her dead daughter, and she didn't know whether to hold her tighter or run until her feet bled. She pulled out her phone, somehow still clinging to battery life despite being soaked earlier in the marsh, and opened the camera. Her hand was shaking so violently the frame jumped, but she aimed it at her face anyway, then tilted it down toward the child. "She's back," she whispered, tears streaking down the dirt on her cheeks. "I don't know how, but she's real. This isn't in my head. I know what they said before, but this time I'm sure. She's warm. She's breathing. She called me Mama. You all told me she was gone, but she wasn't. I don't care what anyone says, I'm not crazy. I'm not." She clicked off the camera and curled up around the baby, still whispering, still trembling. Across the town, police scanners buzzed with an urgent alert. A woman believed to have escaped from a psychiatric facility upstate had been spotted running near Route 7, reportedly carrying a life-size doll and exhibiting signs of severe delusion. Citizens were advised not to approach. Authorities considered her unstable and potentially dangerous. If spotted, the report read, "Notify dispatch immediately and do not engage." But Elena didn't know about the alert. She didn't care. All she could think about was the way the baby's tiny fingers had curled around hers, the way it had blinked up at her like Sophia used to do, that exact same sleepy half-smile that made her heart ache. She hadn't seen that face in a decade. Not in dreams. Not even in her worst nightmares, because for the last 10 years, every night had been about drowning. Every dream, every flash of memory, was her daughter's voice screaming from under the water, from somewhere too deep to reach.
Elena remembers the splash, the silence after, the stillness.
And then the days of search teams and shallow reassurances. And finally, the coffin. The tiny coffin with a plastic white rose and an empty body that didn't feel like her daughter's at all. That was the moment her mind began to crack. Marco, her husband, had begged her to stop asking questions, to stop insisting it wasn't Sophia inside that casket. He'd told her she was grieving wrong. And then he'd left. Now here she was.
10 years later.
Alone.
In a rotting house.
Holding a baby who hadn't cried once since she found her on the roadside 2 nights ago. A baby who shouldn't exist. A baby who had Sophia's face, Sophia's scent, even Sophia's birthmark, a faint butterfly shadow on the left shoulder.
Det dit elle med Elena sob arde den anything else.
That birthmark wasn't in any of the pictures. No one else had known it was there. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing leaves across the broken porch.
Elena stiffened.
She heard something, a crunch of footsteps on gravel. Peeking through a slit in the wall, she saw flashlights in the distance.
Dogs barking.
Voices calling her name. Her real name. Not the one she had been using in the shelter 2 towns over. They had found her again.
The world still wanted her locked away.
They still believed she was mad. And maybe they were right. But as she looked down at the baby, who blinked and reached up with perfect little fingers to touch her chin, Elena whispered to herself, "No, this time I'm right."
She came back to me.
Somehow she did. The baby smiled.
And somewhere deep in Elena's bones, something shivered.
The hospital room was cold, colder than it should have been for late spring. Lena sat by the window, her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms tightly wrapped around herself not for warmth, but to stop the shaking that hadn't ceased since the incident in the woods. The pale blue walls, the hum of fluorescent lighting, and the constant beeping of machines did little to ground her. Her face, still bruised at the jawline where she'd hit the tree, looked pale and tight. Her green eyes, once vivid and always alive with questions, were now glassy, as if searching some invisible point far beyond the hospital walls. Her shoulder-length ash-brown hair hung loosely, damp with sweat and clumped at the ends. She wore a gray hoodie with an old university logo faded across the chest, and brown mud still stained her sleeves and jeans from the night in the forest. Across from her, Detective Reese Calloway watched with narrowed eyes. Reese, always composed, had a presence that made the room feel heavier when he entered. In his mid-40s, Reese had a solid build, a square jaw peppered with stubble, and cold steel-blue eyes that seemed incapable of missing anything. His short-cropped black hair was combed neatly, and his dark navy overcoat, still zipped up despite the heat indoors, gave him the look of someone who never truly relaxed. He'd spent his entire career unraveling messy truths, and this one, he knew, would be messier than most. He tapped a pen on his notepad, eyeing Lena's every twitch. "Tell me again, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Where did the baby go?" Lena's lips parted, but no words came. She looked out the window instead, the forest at the edge of the hospital property barely visible. Her voice finally broke through the silence, low and shaky. "He was just gone. 1 second he was crying, then," she swallowed hard. "He wasn't. And then I looked down and there was nothing." Reese didn't blink. "You do understand why this doesn't make sense, right? You told the emergency responders you were running from someone. That you had a baby. But no baby was found. No prints. No signs of anyone else in the area." Lena pressed her hands to her temples.
"I'm not crazy." Her voice cracked.
"I felt him. I held him. He was real." Reese nodded slowly, then stood, walking over to the foot of her bed where a small clear plastic bag sat. Inside it was the infant's knitted cap, a faded yellow beanie with a hand-stitched bear patch on the front. "This was found in your pocket," he said. "It's 20 years old. Fabric degraded. Faint traces of human DNA, yes, but not recent. You said you made it for your son, Aiden, before he died." Lena nodded slowly, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "It was in the cedar box. I hadn't taken it out in years." "So how did it end up in your coat pocket that night?" he asked.
Non cercam.
She didn't know. At least, not in a way that made sense. A gentle knock came at the door, and in stepped Dr. Evangeline Moore, a woman in her early 50s with long silver hair pulled into a low bun, thin-rimmed glasses perched delicately on her sharp nose, and a calm maternal presence that softened even the harshest situations. She wore a pale lavender blouse beneath her white lab coat, and her voice was soft as silk. "Detective," she said, "I need a moment with the patient." Reese hesitated, then nodded, walking past her with a curt nod and quiet footsteps. Dr. Moore pulled up a chair and sat beside Lena. "You're not insane, Lena," she said softly. "But trauma, grief, it can open doors in the mind. Doors to places most of us never go." Lena looked up, voice barely a whisper. "He was real. I felt his weight. I heard him breathe. It wasn't just in my head." Dr. Moore nodded slowly. "Maybe not. Some trauma leaves traces not only in the body, but in the world. Grief this deep has a gravity to it. Sometimes things get pulled into it." Her tone was cautious, as though measuring every word. Lena frowned. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" The doctor met her gaze, her eyes unreadable. I'm saying you may be caught in something old. Older than the hospital. Older than this town. Places remember, Lena. Forests especially. They remember pain. And sometimes, if the grief is strong enough, they respond. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She remembered the clearing, the wind stilling, the sudden weight in her arms, the voice calling her name in the darkness that wasn't hers. Before she could speak, her hospital door creaked open again. This time, it was her father, Peter Hayes. A tall, wiry man in his 60s with deep crow's feet carved into his tan skin, gray hair combed back from a high forehead, and a weathered green flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans. His boots still carried dust from the trail. "Lena," he said softly, eyes full of concern. "We need to talk." She looked up, startled. She hadn't seen him in over a year. Not since the last argument about letting go of Aiden's memory. She expected judgment. Instead, he looked broken. He walked in slowly, pulled the chair to her side, and held her hand. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago. About your mother. About the house. About Aiden." Lena blinked, her mind reeling. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, eyes shifting to the window. "Your mother, she used to talk to someone. After you were born. She said he wasn't from here. That he came from the woods. I thought it was postpartum delusion. But she believed it. And when Aiden died, she changed." Lena's heart thudded. She whispered, "What are you saying?" Peter leaned in closer. "You weren't the first to hear voices in those woods. And you're not the first to lose a child and then see them again." Her blood ran cold. The beanie in her coat pocket. The weight of a baby who shouldn't exist. The voice that called her name in the dark. She thought it was madness. But maybe it was something older. Something waiting. Just then, her phone buzzed on the side table. Unknown number. One new message. With shaking fingers, she opened it. Just 3 words. "Come find me." Attached was a picture, blurry, taken in the dark, of the clearing in the woods. And a small figure standing in it, holding something in their arms. The baby. Her baby. Aiden. Still wearing that yellow beanie. Still impossibly real that Clara's breath came in ragged pulls as she cradled the still bundle in her arms, rocking back and forth on the rotting floorboards of the church, her eyes bloodshot from exhaustion and something deeper, something unspoken. The rain had quieted now, the storm sliding into a mournful drizzle, but inside her head it still thundered, the echo of screams from a decade ago, the sound of monitors flatlining, the high-pitched keening of her own grief strangling itself in her throat. She whispered a lullaby through cracked lips, the same one she had sung 10 years ago in that sterile hospital room, her voice warbling between delusion and devotion. In her mind, she was still that girl in the lavender cardigan, clutching a hope that bled out in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers were curled now, frozen in time, unmoving, yet she cooed to him like he might open his eyes again, as if love alone could warm flesh gone cold for years. Her fingers trembled as she pressed a kiss to the stiff fabric wrapped around Eli's head. "We're safe now," she whispered to the baby that wasn't. "No one can take you again." Outside, headlights cut through the mist, and she instinctively ducked behind a pew. Through the cracked stained glass, Sheriff Darden's cruiser glided slowly down the gravel path, tires crunching over wet stone. Clara peeked, her pupils shrinking as recognition lit her up. Maeve Darden, the woman who had once interrogated her through tears, accused her through paperwork, filed reports instead of condolences. That name burned in Clara's skull. "You never believed me," she murmured to the silent child. "You let them bury him before the truth could come out." A truth she had held onto, gripped so tightly it had torn her apart. Eli hadn't just died, he had been taken. Stolen. His body returned, but his soul, no, not returned. Clara didn't know if she had lost her mind then, or now, but that space between grief and madness had become her only home. Inside the church, time bent, present and past overlapped like translucent film. She blinked and she was back in the hospital hallway, 10 years ago. Blood on her hospital gown. Nurses whispering. Dr. Levin avoiding her eyes. The baby was gone, they had said, respiratory failure, they had said. But Clara remembered how his body had felt different when they handed it back to her. Too stiff, too still, like it had been prepared. Like it had been gone longer than they claimed. They only let her hold him for 6 minutes before they wheeled him away again. She had screamed. She had begged. And they had given her medication instead of answers. Now, sitting in the church pew as water dripped from her sleeves and lightning flashed again, Clara clung to Eli's tiny corpse as if the truth lived inside his bones. A sound. Creaking wood. She turned sharply. Someone was inside. The front door groaned open, and a silhouette emerged. Not Sheriff Darden. No, this shape was smaller. Hesitant. "Clara," came a young man's voice, shaking. From the shadows stepped Jamie, the only person who had ever believed her. 10 years younger than her, once the neighbor's kid, now a grown man with a trimmed beard, soaked hoodie, and eyes wide with memory. "You called me," he said, holding up his phone. I thought you were dead." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had texted him the coordinates, not knowing if her message even went through. "He's here, Jamie," she whispered. "He came back to me." Jamie looked down at the bundle and froze. Horror twisted his face. Clara, he's not, he's gone." Clara's arms stiffened. "Don't say that. He's listening." Jamie took a step closer, voice soft like one would use with a cornered animal. "Clara, you need help. You never got it. Let me help you, please. You can't carry this anymore. Not like this." The candle flickered violently. Something unseen passed through the air, a sudden drop in temperature, a shiver in Jamie's spine. And then came a noise, faint, impossible. A baby's giggle, gurgling through the silence. Jamie's face drained of color. Clara didn't move. "You heard him," she said with a trembling smile. "He knows you're here." Jamie took a step back. Behind him, the church door slammed shut. Jamie froze where he stood, his sneakers rooted to the cracked tiles of the church floor as that inhuman giggle echoed again, light, playful, yet sharp enough to split bone from marrow. Clara was still cradling the bundle, rocking it gently, her smile stretching unnaturally wide across her tired, rain-speckled face. "You heard him," she repeated, her voice fragile but full of awe, like a mother watching her baby laugh for the first time. But Jamie's breath hitched in his throat. He wasn't sure what terrified him more, that something had laughed, or that Clara truly believed it had. The air was thick now, pregnant with something old and unspoken. Candles flared and dimmed on their own. Behind the altar, a crucifix tilted ever so slightly, creaking like it too was waking up. Jamie took a step forward, slowly raising his hands. "Clara, listen to me," he said, keeping his voice level, careful, as if trying to coax a wild animal. "You've been through something no one should. But we need to go. Together." Clara blinked slowly, as if trying to decipher a foreign language. Her grip on the bundle tightened, the tattered blanket pulled tighter. "We're already together," she said. "He came back. He came back for me. You said I was crazy, you said he was gone, but look." She angled the bundle toward him, but Jamie flinched. The blanket slipped just slightly, revealing a blur of pale, shrunken limbs, too thin, too stiff. Jamie nearly gagged, taking a full step back. "Clara," he whispered, "that's not." But before he could finish, the candles all went out at once. A wind shot through the old church, howling like a banshee, blowing papers and dust into a swirling tornado of debris. The baby's giggle turned into a sharp, choked scream.
Then silence.
Deafening.
Jamie s'y
When he opened his eyes again, Clara was standing. But something had changed in her posture. Her face was wet with tears, but her expression had gone blank, like a record stuck on a broken groove. "He's hungry," she said quietly, as if in a trance. "He needs to be fed before he gets angry."
Jamie stepped back again, hat pounding like our drum. "Clara, please. Let me help you."
"Let me take him," she snarled suddenly, a raw sound erupting from her throat. "Don't you touch him," she shrieked, eyes wide, bloodshot, and glowing faintly in the dark. "You don't get to take him from me again." The walls trembled as if responding to her rage.
Far above, one of the stained glass windows cracked straight through the center with a sharp, splintering sound.
Jamie turned and bolted toward the back door of the church, the emergency exit. It didn't budge. He slammed his shoulder into it. Again. Nothing. Trapped. Behind him, he could hear her pacing, muttering lullabies, speaking to something that didn't reply, at least not in any language Jamie could understand. Then came the whispers. Low, guttural, layered.
Adosant voices overlapping.
She called us, she brought him back. Jamie spun around. Shadows twisted along the pews, figures too tall and too thin, flickering like candlelight but solid enough to cast reflections in the broken glass. They slithered along the floor and climbed the walls, surrounding Clara protectively like sentinels. And Clara? She didn't flinch. They watched over him in the dark, she said softly, lovingly. When the nurses took him away, when they put him in the ground, I knew it wasn't right. I knew he wasn't done here.
Her eyes met Jamie's again.
He didn't want to leave me. And now, he's back. And he's not alone.
Jamie's backit the locket d'or.
Clara, this isn't your son, he said, fighting the panic rising in his throat. It's something pretending to be him. You have to see that. You have to let go. Clara looked down at the bundle in her arms. Her face twitched, a tremor of doubt passing like a ripple. Then came a sound, soft, wet breathing, from the bundle. Jamie's stomach flipped. It was real. Whatever it was breathing. You hear him. Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. He's cold. He's so cold. Jamie took a desperate chance. Let me hold him, he said, stretching out both hands slowly. Just for a second. Let me help. She hesitated. The baby-shaped bundle shifted slightly in her arms. Something inside it writhed, like roots in soil.
Clara stepped forward. 1 step.
2. Her lip quivered. Then suddenly, the back door behind Jamie unlocked with a loud click. He spun around, confused, just as the baby's giggle returned. Closer, louder, and now, angry.
Clara screamed.
The lights exploded in a burst of sparks. Jamie grabbed Clara's wrist and yanked her toward the door, but the bundle stayed clutched to her chest. We can't leave him, she screamed, resisting. Jamie didn't let go. We have to run, he shouted, dragging her through the doorway as the shadows surged forward like a tidal wave. The last thing he saw before the door slammed shut behind them was the bundle in Clara's arms unraveling midair, empty. Just rotting fabric falling to the ground. And the giggling stopped. The rain had turned the forest road into a nightmare of slick earth and tangled branches, but Jamie didn't dare stop running, not with Clara stumbling beside him, still gasping for the bundle she had dropped. Her cries weren't just maternal, they were possessed, primal, as if part of her soul had been ripped away with that bundle of dirt and cloth. Jamie had seen some unspeakable things in his life, but nothing compared to what had just happened inside that collapsing church. As they fled the ruined sanctuary, the sky split open again with thunder, and Clara collapsed to her knees just beyond the tree-line, clutching her chest. He was warm, she sobbed, dragging her fingernails across her own skin as if trying to claw out the loss. Jamie hesitated, unsure whether to comfort her or protect himself. Her hair clung to her face, soaked and twisted, her dress hanging off one shoulder, streaked with earth and something darker. Clara, listen to me, he said softly, crouching. That wasn't him. That wasn't Matthew. He's not in that thing. She looked up with a vicious glare. Don't say his name like that. The venom in her voice chilled him. You never knew him like I did. You didn't hold him when he stopped breathing. Jamie's jaw clenched. Because you wouldn't let anyone else hold him. You locked yourself in the house for 3 weeks with a dead baby, Clara.
Do you remember that?
Her silence was a storm in itself. She turned her face away and whispered, You don't know what it's like to hear your child laughing, after they've been buried. He didn't argue. How could he? Even now, he wasn't sure what they'd encountered. The bundle had writhed. It had giggled. And those things, the shadows they hadn't attacked. They'd surrounded her. Protected her. Worshipped her? No, worshipped the bundle. We need to get out of these woods, he muttered, standing up and scanning the trail ahead. The GPS had stopped working long ago, and their phones were useless. Only trees, soaked with a moaning wind, surrounded them in every direction. Clara stood slowly, wiping her face and moving stiffly like she was waking from a nightmare. Her fingers twitched at her side, empty now. He's not gone, she muttered. Not really. They showed me that. They showed me how to keep him. You're not keeping anything, Jamie snapped. Whatever was in that bundle, it wasn't Matthew. You think I don't know that? She said suddenly, almost screaming. You think I didn't see the difference? My son had eyes like mine, and soft breath, and fingers that curled around mine when he slept. That thing, it pretended. But I felt it. It watched me. It used his name. It used me. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and Jamie realized she was unraveling again. Clara, look at me, he said, grabbing her shoulders. You're not crazy. You're grieving. You've been grieving for a decade. But whatever this is, it's feeding on that. It's using your love like a signal. She blinked rapidly, and for a brief moment, he saw the woman she used to be, bright, clever, and warm. But just as quickly, that flicker vanished. Her mouth opened as if to respond, then her eyes darted to something behind him. Jamie, she whispered, voice hollow. He turned. There, at the bend in the muddy trail, stood the impossible. A silhouette. Small. Childlike. Head slightly tilted. A toddler, naked, caked in mud, standing perfectly still under the dripping leaves. The shadows around it pulsed faintly. No eyes. No face. Just shape. Jamie instinctively stepped in front of Clara. Stay behind me. But she shoved him aside. No, he's real this time. I know him, she cried, running toward the child figure. Clara, no. Jamie shouted, but it was too late. As she reached for it, the figure raised one tiny hand, palm out, and she stopped. Instantly. Her breath hitched. Her knees gave way. Her body shook with sobs as she knelt in front of the thing. It's him. Jamie, it's him. I feel him. Jamie didn't know what was real anymore. But what chilled him to his core wasn't the child, it was what surrounded it. Dozens of other shadowy figures, tall and humanoid, forming a perfect circle around Clara. Silent. Watching. Waiting. Like they were attending a sacrament. Clara, we have to leave. Now, he pleaded, stepping cautiously toward her. But she didn't look back. She was singing. That lullaby again, the one Jamie had heard in the baby monitor all those years ago, when he had first arrived at her house after Matthew's death. Back then, he thought it was her trauma looping. Now he wasn't so sure. Clara, please, he whispered, almost begging. You don't belong to them. But he does, she murmured without looking up. He's their prince. They told me. He was chosen the day he died. That's why I couldn't let him go. I heard them even then. Jamie's vision blurred with the onslaught of rain, but he could see enough. The toddler-shaped figure took Clara's hand. She smiled like she was being reunited with God himself. Then, as if swallowed by the forest, the entire circle of shadows folded inward, and Clara vanished in the blink of an eye, gone without a sound, as if she'd never existed. Jamie screamed her name into the trees until his voice tore apart. But there was nothing. No trace. No sound. Just an empty trail and the cold sting of grief blooming again where he thought it had died long ago. He fell to his knees, gasping, hands buried in the mud, unsure whether to weep or vomit. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Like it had just made a deal and was now watching him decide what to do next. And somewhere, not far off, a baby laughed. Jamie didn't leave the forest for 3 days. He searched, screamed, bled from thorns, tore through branches, and collapsed beside trees that looked like tombstones in the half-light of dusk. There was no sign of Clara, no trace of her footprints beyond the clearing where the shadows took her, only the memory of that final smile she gave him, serene, almost relieved, like someone stepping into a dream they longed for their whole life. The toddler-shaped figure that she had followed had vanished too, along with a circle of silent shadows that folded in around her like a cloak. His voice broke, calling her name again and again, and when silence answered, he whispered to the trees, to the wind, to the void, "Bring her back." But the forest held its breath. He had nothing left, no signal, no food, no fire. Just the soaked earth beneath his knees and a grief so consuming that it burned hotter than his fear. He relived every moment with her, rewinding them like an old tape. The first time she clutched the hospital blanket where their real daughter had died, the way she clung to a hallucination like it was more real than him, the rituals, the desperation in her eyes, and finally, that frantic run through the forest with an invisible baby in her arms. His mind cracked in places where love and logic collided. When they eventually found him, he was unconscious, face down in the mud near the clearing, clutching something wrapped in fabric. The rescuers, 2 hikers and a forest ranger, thought he was dead at first. When he awoke, strapped to a stretcher in a rural clinic. His mouth was dry, his hands bandaged, and his memory fractured. "Where's Clara?" he asked again and again. But no one had seen a woman in the woods. No one had seen anyone but him. The baby blanket he held turned out to be a ripped piece of his own shirt, knotted around a bundle of wet leaves and stones. They diagnosed him with exhaustion and trauma-induced psychosis, suggested therapy, and released him to a world that had already moved on. Clara's parents blamed him. Her sister accused him. The police closed the case citing unresolved mental instability. But Jamie didn't fight them. He moved away, grew quieter, colder, lost weight and sleep in equal measure, and kept seeing her in flashes. Clara running barefoot with her arms curled around nothing, that peaceful smile before the shadows consumed her, and the echo of a lullaby that shouldn't have been possible. Then one night, as he was walking home from his night shift at a packaging warehouse, he saw it again. At the edge of the woods bordering the town, those same woods, stood a woman. Her dress was white, hanging like soaked silk, her arms swaying gently as though cradling something weightless. She looked up. Her face was unmistakable.
Clara.
No older. No older than she had been when she disappeared. She was humming.
The Sam lullaby.
The one that always made their baby kick inside her belly. Jamie froze, his feet rooted to the ground, breath suspended. Behind her, deeper in the trees, a dozen small silhouettes stood in still reverence, unmoving. Watching. Waiting. Clara tilted her head, smiled so faintly it might have been a twitch, then turned and walked into the trees. And this time, Jamie followed.
Without fear. Without hesitation.
As he stepped past the tree line, the world behind him seemed to hold its breath. His phone fell from his pocket and cracked on the rocks below. His footsteps grew softer until they vanished completely. Search teams were called. His story resurfaced in local forums, conspiracy groups, podcasts. Some claimed a pattern, people vanishing in those woods, all grieving someone they'd lost. One man claimed to have seen a group of children holding hands at the tree line, their eyes dark, faces solemn. But it was always foggy. Always just at dusk. The town eventually posted a warning sign near the path, "Enter at your own risk, unstable terrain." Most ignored it. Until, a year later, a woman hiking alone took a photo. In the distant tree line stood a man and a woman, hand in hand, with something small cradled in the woman's arms. She posted it online with the caption, "They looked peaceful. But I swear, there was no one else out there." And far in the background of her photo, when the contrast was raised, faint and almost imperceptible, were the eyes of children glowing softly like distant stars in the forest dark.